It's Bama week, y'all. We all know what this game means. It won't be for the faint of heart. The hype is already out of control. Number 2 versus number 4. And it's time to break down this massive top 5 matchup. So in this video, I've got the most in-depth breakdown of the Georgia offense versus the Alabama defense that you're going to find anywhere. So let's get after it.
We just stepped on their face with a hobnail boot and broke their nose. We just crushed their face.
What's up, guys? I'm Tyler, and this is the Glory UGA podcast brought to you by our great friends at MyBookie. If you're not betting with MyBookie this football season, guys, you're doing it wrong. So sign up for a brand new account at mybookie.ag. Use our promo code UGA, and they'll hook you up with a 100% bonus on top of your first deposit. So don't miss out on that. And guys, we're going deep here on today's episode, giving you a really good taste of what we're all about here on the Glory UGA podcast. So if you are into this type of in-depth Georgia football content, make sure to subscribe right now. Watch the video, like the video, comment, let me know what you guys think, and most importantly, check out the Glory UGA podcast on the audio side of things, wherever you get your podcast, for a whole lot more coverage of Georgia football just like this. But all right, guys, let's do this thing. Usually, when we're previewing a game during the football season, on this podcast, we do like one big full-on preview, breaking down the opposing offense, opposing defense. We put it all in one. But with a game of this magnitude between two SEC Titans, I'm going even bigger this week, guys. I'm doing two separate full breakdowns of this game. I'm doing the Georgia offense versus the Alabama defense, and then we'll flip it over and do the Georgia defense versus the Alabama offense. And given all the hand-wringing over the Georgia offense over the last week and a half following that very disturbing one-point victory over the Kentucky Wildcats, where we had a very poor offensive showing, the poorest offensive showing by a Georgia offense, I think, since the 2021 Clemson game to open that 2021 season. So given that context, we're going to start with the Georgia offense versus the Alabama defense here today. Tomorrow, I will flip things over. We'll do the Georgia defense versus Jalen Milroe and that Alabama offense. And for the previews this week, I'm bringing back an old favorite. Today, I'm going to do this preview using our old countdown format. It's been a year or so, maybe a little bit longer, since I've used the countdown preview format, but I know a lot of fans enjoy that. I've had a few people reaching out asking me to go back to doing that. So you know what? If you guys ask, you shall receive. So we're going back in time today, pulling out the countdown preview and previewing different aspects of this game along the way. If you guys are not familiar, if you're new to this podcast, finding us on YouTube for the first time, our countdown preview is pretty simple. We're going to start from 5, we'll work our way down to 1. Along the way, we're going to be previewing different aspects of this game. We got 5 players to know, 4 scheme notes, 3 stats that matter, 2 keys to the game, and 1 prediction. Not the full-on game prediction. We'll save that for the end of the week, but 1 prediction as it pertains to the Georgia offense versus this Alabama defense. So that's how we're setting things up today. Let's go ahead and dive in, starting with 5 players to know on this Alabama defense. So I'm trying to get you Georgia fans out there, get you fully acquainted with this Bama team. I know you know they're good, right? But we want to make sure you are fully prepared for this game, know exactly what to watch for, who to watch out for. So let's kick it off with 5 players to know. Off the top here, we're going to start with Q Robinson, who's been around for a long time, Alabama. He's been there 4 or 5 years now. He leads the team with 3 sacks currently, and they use this guy in unique ways. They don't just use him as an edge rusher like traditionally Alabama would use their jack linebacker, the Will Andersons of the world, the Dallas Turners of the world last year. A little bit different. So Kane Womack coming over as the defensive coordinator is using this guy, and Quay Russell, the other guy they use as a primary pass rusher, he's also very, very good. We're going Q Robinson, though, as one of these 5 players you know, because he is leading Alabama in sacks. But both those guys, they'll line them up all over the place on defense. Sure, sometimes they'll line them up on the edge, but they'll have them standing up off the line of scrimmage, like off the ball linebackers. They'll have them over guards. They'll have them over tackles. They'll have them on the edge. They'll use them in a variety of ways to create matchups that they want to create. Also, if you're moving around like that, it makes it much more difficult for the opposing offense, the offensive coordinator, to game plan against you, because you don't really specifically know on any given down and distance where those dynamic pass rushers will be. It's hard to call them edge rushers, because they're not always rushing from the edge the way maybe they once did under Nick Saban. So a little bit of a different format set up there defensively with Kane Wommack coming over as the new defense coordinator for Alabama. So you got to know where Q Robinson is at all times. Quay Russell as well, you got to know where he is. But Robinson right now I think is their most dynamic pass rusher. They got a couple of them though, but he's the guy I would watch out for. 3 sacks on the season. Then on the interior of the defensive line for this Alabama front, they've got a number of guys. I mean, they have a bunch of veterans. You got Tim Smith, you got Jaheim Otis, you got LT Overton, who came over from Texas A&M. He reclassified a couple years. He's actually a Georgia guy. Reclassified a couple years back. Was in that massive Texas A&M like #1 recruiting class in the history of recruiting classes. Now has found his way over to Alabama. He plays more of the 5 tech for them, like what would have been the 5 tech in the Saban parlance and what we use. But he's also a really good football player. They got Payne, who's a really good football player. But I think the best player right now, at least the player who's playing at the highest level for this Alabama defensive line right now, is a redshirt junior by the name of Tim Keenan. And he's always been a guy that's had the potential. I mean, he goes to Alabama, right? They recruit him. Alabama doesn't recruit scrubs. He's a really talented football player. But earlier in his career, he had difficulty staying on the field and getting on the field with any sort of consistency because he was struggling with weight. But now he seems to have gotten his weight under control. He's 6'2", weighing right around 325-ish pounds right now. He primarily plays nose tackle for them. I think he has been their best interior player. And look, all those guys are good, and they'll rotate those guys in and out, the Tim Smith, the Otises of the world, Overton at the 5 tech, they'll rotate Payne in there. They have a bunch of guys that they'll rotate in and out like we like to. We haven't really been able to so far this year because we have had just an unreal number of injuries at that one spot on the defensive line. Looks like we're hopefully going to be getting a lot of those guys back this week, but they haven't dealt with those number of injuries, so they've been able to rotate those guys. But right now, I think Tim Keenan is a guy that is playing at the highest level. He's been really strong at the point of attack. He's creating negative plays in the backfield. He's tough to move. He's got some athleticism at that size, a 6'2", 325. I really think that he is the guy that Georgia has got to account for when we're trying to run the football, and also even when we're trying to pass. He's not a major pass rush threat, but he can push the pocket from the interior, force Carson Beck off his spot, and that's difficult for Carson. Carson's not elite. Like, Carson's elite in the pocket. At least he has been in the past. Maybe not so much recently. When you get Carson outside the pocket, when he has to create, that's where I don't want to say it breaks down, but he is not the same quarterback. So you got to make sure that you account for Tim Keenan and you keep that guy under control. The fortunate thing for Georgia is while we have had issues at tackle at times this year, the interior of our offensive line, I think, has been one of the strengths of our offense. Now, losing Tate Ratledge for this game, that does hurt. Fortunately for Georgia, Micah Morris has played a ton of football. Kirby likes to say that we have like 3 starters at guard. Obviously, you can't start 3 guys. What he's saying is we have 3 guys that we trust to be starters for us. Only 2 can play. One of them's now out for this game, but Micah Morris coming in, played a lot of football for us. Dylan Fairchild might have been played at the highest level on this offensive line all year, and I really, really like what we've got from Jared Wilson at the center position. He's really athletic. He's strong at the point of attack. I think he will do a good job of, I don't want to say controlling Tim Keenan, but not allowing him to dictate and control the football game. Moving back into the secondary, let's talk about Malachi Moore, who's now a 5th-year senior, been around for a long time, played a lot of football for Alabama. Obviously, this isn't a new system, so like all the players on the Alabama roster that were returning from last year, he had to learn this new system. Is there some carryover in what they were doing, Saban? Sure, they do some similar things, their cover 3, their cover 6 stuff, but he had to learn new defense. Fortunately for them, he has been around for a long time. He knows football. He's seen a lot of things from offenses, and the transition has been relatively seamless thus far for Malachi Moore. He's playing safety for them right now, and I think in many ways, Malachi Moore is the heart of this Alabama defense. Yes, 5th-year guy, a veteran, and as a veteran who's played a ton of football for Alabama, seen a lot throughout the years, and offenses have thrown a ton at him, he doesn't make a ton of mistakes. Like, if you're counting on Alabama to bust in the back end, there might be some players that they got a freshman starting, which we'll talk about here in a minute, but I don't anticipate that any of those busts will come from Malachi Moore. I'd be stunned if they were, because this guy's played so much football. He's a smart football player, an instinctive football player, an athletic guy, and he's again, the heartbeat, I think, of this Alabama defense back there at safety. But sticking in the secondary, we got to talk about Xavier Brown. So I kind of alluded to him a second ago. Xavier Brown, I'm not here to tell you that he sucks. That's not the case. Xavier Brown is extraordinarily talented, a very physically gifted player. He's a 5-star prospect who is a former top 30 player overall nationally in this 2024 recruiting class, but he is a true freshman. Now, he has started every game for them. He's played a lot for them this year and hasn't been hasn't been bad. I'm not saying that Xavier Brown has been a guy that's just been getting beat all over the place. That's not the case. But man, I'm telling you, there have been plays for opposing offenses to hit against him where he has gotten beat, but the opposing offenses just haven't had the ability, the personnel, to actually hit those plays. Sometimes they're not able to protect the quarterback. Sometimes the quarterback like Byron Brown for South Florida just could not hit anything down the field. I'm telling you guys, Xavier Brown is talented, but South Florida burned him multiple times. They could not make Alabama pay for it because Byron Brown, as talented as he is as a runner, is still very much a work in progress as a passer. And they took those shots. In the first half of that game against Alabama, I've actually been in the first quarter, they took 2 shots, back-to-back shots down the field to the boundary against Xavier Brown, and they had both shots. Xavier Brown was beaten both times. The first time, not as bad. The receiver had like a step and a half on. The second time, on back-to-back plays, the receiver had about 3 steps on Xavier Brown. It was a walk-in, like 75, 70-yard touchdown pass if Byron Brown could have just hit that receiver. But that's just not really what he does. The threat he brings us more as a runner, and they ran the ball very effectively against Alabama. But Xavier Brown, again, talented player, good football player, will be really, really, really good for Alabama, but you can create explosive plays against him. It's just a matter, can Georgia hit them? Can Carson Beck get back to being the Carson Beck we know and love from last year, and actually take those shots, cut the ball loose, give his playmakers opportunities to make plays and actually hit them down the field. So hopefully Carson Beck recovers from whatever it was that was giving him issues against Kentucky, whether that's in his own head, whether it's not trusting playmakers, whatever it is, he's got to get back to being the Carson Beck that we know and love from last year. It's incumbent on Mike Bobo as the offensive coordinator. He has responsibility here as well. It's incumbent upon him to scheme things up to create one-on-one matchups for Georgia's playmakers at receiver on Xavier Brown. And then it is incumbent on Carson Beck if Mike Bobo does dial those up, which, by the way, guys, and a lot of people are hating on Mike Bobo right now. That's fine. I get it. I understand he's not perfect, but there were many plays, I don't use that word lightly, many plays that he dialed up against Kentucky that Carson Beck just did not execute. Or receivers didn't execute, maybe we didn't block, but there are multiple plays where Carson had shots down the field and he did not take them, which I still can't quite make sense of. I feel like it's him not trusting some of these guys that aren't Brock Bowers and aren't Ladd McConkey. Guys, Carson Beck's got to get over that. So it's incumbent on Carson. When Mike Bobo dials those plays up, when and if those plays present themselves, Carson has got to cut it loose and hit those shots down the field. I truly do believe that they will present themselves, particularly against Xavier Brown, if we get some one-on-one coverage out there, and we just got to take the shot and we got to hit the shot. See what happens. Give your playmakers opportunities to make plays one-on-one. I think we have those guys in Colby Young, in Dylan Bell, in Arian Smith. I think we have guys who can do that. We just got to give them chances. So Xavier Brown, talented player, but I think he's a guy that Georgia can target in the pass game. And then finally here, the last player to know on this Alabama defense, another guy a lot like Malachi Moore. If you want to say like there's a second heart to this defense, I think it's Deontay Lawson, an inside linebacker. He's now a redshirt junior, really good football player, 6'2", 240 pounds, played a lot of football for Alabama, a veteran now, 18 starts over the last 2.5 years, including these first 3 games of 2024. He's a smart football player. He plays really aggressive, plays really hard. He's a good tackler, and he's a really good athlete. I don't think he's an elite athlete. I don't think he excels in space. He's not a liability in space. I just don't think that's where he excels. I think he's better between the tackles. But I do think that we can, exploit's kind of a strong word, but I think that we can have some success against both Deontay Lawson and his inside linebacker running mate, Jahad Campbell, in space. So we get running backs like Nate Frazier, Trevor Etienne matched up on them in the pass game. If we insist on using 12 personnel, which I'll get to a little bit later on, I don't know if we should continue to use 12 personnel as much as we do, but if we do insist on continuing to go with a lot of 12 personnel, we need to get our tight ends in the pass game matched up on these guys, and I think we can have some success in that regard. And also, guys, they don't have a ton of depth at inside linebacker, at least not a ton of quality depth that they trust right now the way that Georgia does at inside linebacker. Right now, Deontay Lawson, through the first 3 weeks of the season, has played 85% of their defensive snaps. His running mate, Jahad Campbell, has played 79%. That is a lot of snaps at inside linebacker. Georgia, we don't have a single inside linebacker that has played more than 62% of our snaps, and that is CJ Allen. And they're all right around like mid-50s to high 50s. They're all right around there, at least the top 3 or 4 guys We're rotating on a regular basis, and there's not much drop off there. So Alabama, if this game can stay close, if Georgia can keep this game close, there might be some depth issues for the Alabama linebacking core. And I think that Georgia can maybe start to have some success running the football later in the game if, again, the game is close enough for that to matter and Georgia actually have an opportunity to run the football and not having to pass like crazy and get really pass happy trying to storm back and come back from a fourth quarter deficit. So keep that in mind there. So those are your 5 players to know from this Alabama defense. Q Robinson, 3 sacks, Tim Keenan, in the middle of that defensive line, Malachi Moore, the heart of this Alabama defense, in my opinion. Xavier Brown, a talented freshman, but a guy that still is learning what to do. I think Georgia can have some success taking shots against him one-on-one if we can scheme those up. And then you've got Deontay Lawson at inside linebacker. If Malachi Moore is the heart of the secondary, Deontay Lawson's the heart of that Alabama front 6. All right, moving along here. So those are 5 players to know. Now, let's talk about 4 scheme notes I have for the Georgia Bulldogs. And look, guys, we spent the past week and a half talking about what went wrong for this Georgia offense against Kentucky. So I have shared plenty of thoughts over this past week and a half on what Georgia needs to do to get this offense back on track. But let's try to narrow it down and do this specifically in terms of what Georgia needs to do offensively to be able to attack this Alabama defense. So I'm going to start here, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier. I think Georgia, offensively, Mike Bobo, needs to do a better job of creating space for our playmakers to operate, okay? Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Georgia, over the last 3 to 4 years, when we've gone on this run, winning back-to-back national titles, being number 1 for most of last year, 3 consecutive undefeated regular seasons. It's going to be tough to pull off a 4th one, but hey, we're going to give it our best shot. But since we've been on this run, one of the hallmarks of Georgia offensive football has been 12 personnel. At times in 2021, it was 13 personnel with John Fitzpatrick in there as well. But over the past couple years, it's been 12 personnel, roughly 50-ish% of the time, give or take a few. And I get it. When you have Brock Bowers, you have Darnell Washington, Oscar Delp did a really good job as the year went on last year as an inline tight end. I understand that, of course. Like you're able to run the football, you're able to put the defense in conflict, because if they respond with your 12 personnel, your heavy offensive formation, if they respond with heavy defensive personnel, well, then you have guys like Brock Bowers that create matchups in the passing game, and they're damned if they do, damned if they don't. You put the defense in conflict, which is what every offensive coordinator is trying to do. That's the general idea behind using 12 personnel the way that we have in years past. However, this year, we don't have Brock Bowers. I think we have talented players at tight end that can do more for us in the pass game than what we've seen through the first 3 games. I don't think they've been put in the best situations. And if you're critical of Mike Bobo, I will agree with you. I don't think he's using his personnel effectively enough. I don't have as much of an issue with the play calling as some Georgia fans do. To me, it's more of an issue of maximizing your personnel, putting them in positions to do what they do best. And when we're using 12 personnel, we're not getting those guys involved in the passing game. 7 catches for 105 yards combined through the first 3 games of the year with Georgia's top 3 tight ends. That's it. 7 catches for 105 yards, 1 touchdown. We are not really using them effectively in the passing game. And you saw it against Kentucky, and we saw it to a lesser degree at times against Clemson, at times against Tennessee Tech, but it was a glaring issue against Kentucky. The tight end play in terms of blocking at the point of attack and also on the perimeter with the screen game has left a lot to be desired. And all of them have been guilty at times. Benjamin Orozco, the transfer from Stanford, he's been the one that's been most guilty of that. He hasn't played as much, but there's been some high-profile misses. Now, granted, as I've said many times, we're using that guy in a way that I don't think he should be used. He is a receiving threat. He's much more of a Brock Bowers receiving threat than he is like an Oscar Delp, Darnell Washington inline blocker, but we're kind of trying to turn him into that and not really maximizing what he does well. So if they're not really giving us much in the passing game and they're having lapses in run blocking, why do we still insist on going with so much 12 personnel? Why are we doing that? Why? Because when we're in 12 personnel, you know who's not on the field? Dominic Lovett, our slot receiver. That's who we take off the field. When we have 2 tight ends on the field, Dominic Lovett is not on the field. He played a little bit over 50% of our snaps against Kentucky. That's not enough for the guy I think is our best playmaker at receiver right now. When we need somebody to make a play at receiver, right now it's Dominic Lovett. That's who you're going to go to. So why are we taking him off the field about 50% of the time to put guys on the field that have combined through 3 games for 7 catches and 105 yards. Love had 6 catches alone against Kentucky a week and a half ago. So I think, just from a personnel standpoint, we got to get the 12 personnel. I don't want to say completely abandon it. It has its place. And unless we're going to start using it the way that we use it with Brock Bowers over the past couple years, I think we need to go away from using it as much as we have, all right? So you get Dominic Lovett on the field. And beyond just having a better playmaker on the field right now in Dominic Lovett, here's what it can also do. It spreads the defense out. If you go back and you watch the Kentucky game, if you go back and watch the Clemson game, heck, if you go back and watch the Tennessee Tech game, as I have many, many times over the past couple of weeks, what you're going to notice is that the box is straight up stacked. We are being consistently outnumbered in the box. When we have 12 personnel, when we have 2 tight ends in the field, especially if we have both guys basically near, like bunched up there, we have 2 inline tight ends, we have an inline tight end, we have an H-back, we don't have one flexed out. What's happening is we're getting more defensive bodies. We're bringing more defensive bodies into the box, which constricts the space that our running backs have to operate with, okay? We just have more guys that we have to account for and have to block in the box. And they're bringing safeties down. They're triggering, either like Clemson was triggering at the snap. They were showing 2 high safeties and they were triggering late. Kentucky just flat out had guys in the box, and they were outnumbering us, and we continually ran into it, all right? And when you have all those bodies compressed right there at and near the line of scrimmage in the box like that, it muddies things up for the offensive line. I know Georgia's offensive line has some issues against Kentucky at times. And it wasn't that Kentucky was just necessarily overpowering the Georgia offensive line. Deion Walker's awesome. He had moments of doing that. But really, a lot of it was just blown assignments. And what was happening was when we have all those bodies in the box like that, the communication between the offensive line, especially when you're on the road, which already makes communication difficult, all the reads get muddied up because you have all these bodies and you're like, okay, well, who am I blocking him? Am I blocking him? Who am I blocking? And guy shows late. It makes it more difficult for the offensive line to actually get straight who's blocking who, right? If you spread things out, the effect is you reduce the numbers in the box. It creates a clearer picture for the offensive line. It creates a clearer picture for Carson Beck, who now, if you're blitzing, like say you're an outside linebacker, or you're an inside linebacker who's flexed out trying to defend a tight end who's flexed out, or a slot receiver who's in space. Or if you're the slot defender, I think Alabama now calls it their husky defender, what we call our star defender, what Saban used to call their star defender. Well, if those guys are coming with pressure, when we spread them out, you can see that easier because they're going to have to start coming from a wider distance. When they're all compressed in the box, anybody can come. It's harder to read who it is that's going to be blitzing and where they're coming from. If you spread teams out, you can see, okay, this guy, he's starting to creep towards the line of scrimmage. You have a better picture for the offensive line and the quarterback to see where these guys are coming from. So I think it'll help in a lot of ways. It'll create space for the running backs to operate. You have Dominic Lovett on the field more consistently who can make plays for us. And I think it'll also help Carson Beck identify where the pressure is coming from better than he did against Kentucky, better than he did against Clemson. He was very good at that last year, but I think we're not helping him. We got to make it easier for Carson, make it easier for the offensive line, especially with Tate Ratledge not in the game, a guy who's been around for a long time, played a ton of football for Georgia, him not there to communicate. Michael Morris has played a lot, but not as much as Tate Ratledge. I think it will behoove Georgia in this game, Mike Bobo in particular, to get the offense spread out. Make Alabama play in space. I mentioned Deontay Lawson, Jihad Campbell, good players for Alabama at inside linebacker, but they don't excel in space. That's not what they do best. And what you're always trying to do is you're trying to make your opponent play left-handed. You don't want to allow them to do what they do best. You're trying to make them beat you doing something that's not their skill set, making them play outside their skill set. And I think putting Jihad Campbell, Deontay Lawson out in space, more so than you would if you have all these guys compressed in the box, I think that will work in Georgia's favor. So that's the first thing here from a scheme standpoint that I would do in this game. Second thing, in terms of our run schemes, I want to see more gap scheme runs. We haven't pulled out a lot of gap scheme stuff so far this year. We did a little bit against Clemson, not a ton against Tennessee Tech, and you're trying to be pretty vanilla against Tennessee Tech. And shockingly, we did not run a ton of gap scheme stuff against Kentucky. And when I'm talking about gap scheme stuff, guys, I'm talking about pin and pull stuff, old school pin and pull stuff, right? Counter, power, all that stuff. For a couple of years now, we've been more heavy on the inside zone and duo, and we ran that heavily against Kentucky. Now, Kentucky had a great game plan. Give Kentucky's defense coordinator credit. Give Stoops credit because he's a defensive guy. He's intimately involved with what they do defensively, just like Kirby is here in Athens. One of the things that they were doing very successfully against Georgia was they were twisting and stunting a lot. Their ends and tackles, if you go back and watch it, what they're doing, not every snap, but a lot. What they were doing, especially when we were in shotgun, and we were in shotgun most of the time. We go under center still at times, but not as much as actually I would like to see us do. When we're in shotgun, what they're doing is they're twisting and stunting away from the running back's alignment. So if, let's say, Trevor Etienne's aligned to Carson Beck's left, well, if we're running inside zone, if we're running duo, where's that play going? it's going to the right? So they're twisting and stunting in that direction, away from the running back to where he's going to be taking the football. And that gave us a lot of issues with how active they were up front. Now, I do think if you start to spread out the defense, that kind of mitigates that to a degree. So it goes back to point number one. But gap scheme runs can also be very effective against what Kentucky was doing to the Georgia offensive line. And the reason I bring this up, if Kentucky's offensive line defensive line was doing that a week and a half ago, you know that Alabama watched that film. Obviously, of course they did. And you have to imagine, if they're smart, which I do believe Kane Womack is a really good defensive coordinator, a really smart guy, good defensive mind, it stands to reason they will probably try to employ some of the same strategies that Kentucky did defensively against this Georgia offensive line to try to stymie our run game in the first half. I imagine they will do a lot of those same things. So if they do, we need to have answers this week. What could one of those answers be? Gap scheme runs, in particular counter. So if they're twisting and stunting, so if we have, again, Etienne, Branson Robinson, Nate Frazier, if we have one of those guys lined to the left in shotgun and they're stunting, twisting to the right, opposite the running back, well, let's run counter. And what are we doing? We're blocking down. We're just going to wash them down. Then you pull and you lead up to the second level. And now you have whoever the running back is, you have them take the ball, counter back the opposite way, away from where they're stunting, and now all of a sudden, you have a pretty big running lane. It's pretty obvious to me. Now, Mike Bobo is significantly more knowledgeable about football than I am. It's not even on the same stratosphere. I obviously recognize that. But if I can see that, amateur football guy here, amateur coach here, podcast host, then you know Mike Bobo can. Let's implement these things. Let's make some adjustments using that bye week based off what we saw from Kentucky a week ago, a week and a half ago, and what gave us issues in that game. So I think gap scheme runs could be a big part of the answer to get our run game going this week against Alabama. Speaking of the run game, one of the other issues that we have had, and I alluded to this earlier, I didn't allude to it, I directly addressed it earlier in the week, but I want to bring it back here and go into a little bit more detail. One of the other issues that Georgia has had recently, this year pretty much, in the run game, going back to Clemson, not as much as Tennessee Tech, because, we just outmanned them, but also Kentucky. So the two Power 4 teams that we played, Clemson, Kentucky, truly good defenses. One of the things that destroyed my mind, made me lose my mind. So you're not alone. If you were bashing your head against the wall a week and a half ago during that Kentucky game, as we ran into outnumbered box after outnumbered box after outnumbered box, because I, your boy here, was doing the exact same thing. And one of the biggest issues that we have had all season in the run game is we are not doing enough to put the backside in man on the line of scrimmage. I don't want to say just backside end, because it's not necessarily the defensive end. Whoever that in man on the line of scrimmage is, on the backside of the run, we are not doing enough to consistently put them in conflict. So what does that mean? That means they are crashing on the running back with reckless abandon. Why would you not? Georgia's not even remotely doing anything to make you think that we could do something to counter the run to your side. We're not doing anything to hold them, to keep them honest. So when they're crashing like that, first off, if they're athletic enough, which a lot of these guys in the SEC are, they're going to stop that play in the backfield before it gets started. At the very least, they're cutting off any sort of cutback we have. So if we're running some of the zone stuff that we do, we run a lot of zone scheme stuff. Well, part of that, you're not always going to go play side. You're trying to look for that cutback. Well, when they're crashing like they do, as hard as they do, as recklessly as they are, with no concern for what could possibly come back their way backside, they're cutting off those cutback lanes. And those potential big plays that are there to be had in the run game, they aren't materializing because we aren't holding that backside end man on the line of scrimmage. There were a number of plays against Kentucky, guys. If that backside end does not crash, there's a big gap on the backside in the cutback. We just couldn't hit them because we're not holding that end man on the line of scrimmage. That's got to change. Now, how do you do it, right? That's the question. So we need to figure out a way to hold them, to counter that. But how do you do it? Well, the most obvious answer is, very simplistically, quarterback zone read, which is what Alabama does to account for that backside in-man line of scrimmage. And that makes your entire run game more effective. Even if the quarterback's not pulling the ball, he's not the one running it, it makes your entire run game more effective if the quarterback poses a run threat, because that backside in-man line of scrimmage has to pause. He has to at least surf to potentially defend the threat of the quarterback pulling the football. So it creates that cutback lane, right? There have been no cutback lanes for us. So that's one way you can do it. Now, we all know Carson Beck is not Jalen Milroe in terms of his athletic ability. That's not what makes Carson Beck a good quarterback when he is on. He hasn't been on as much this year, certainly not against Kentucky. But we know he's not a major threat with his legs. But he is a decent athlete. He's done one thing I think he has improved on this year. I know there's a lot of people talking about his regression. I did a video earlier this week kind of addressing has Carson Beck regressed. So make sure to check that out. If you missed it, it's a film session video. I think you guys will enjoy that one. But I do think one of the areas that he has improved is that he has been more willing to take off and run, particularly when he sees man coverage. When defenses have their backs turned to him in man coverage, he'll take off and pick up a first down. Did a couple times against Kentucky, did a couple times against Clemson week 1, did a couple times against Kentucky as well. He's doing a better job of that. He is a better athlete than people give him credit for. So he's not going to break off a 50, 60-yard explosive run like Jalen Milroe would, because he's just a thoroughbred horse out there. But he can do enough to at least make them think about it, to hold it. Now, you don't want Carson to get hurt, so you don't want to do it a ton, but all he needs to do is pull it once or twice. And you might not get a bunch of yards. You might get 2 yards. You might get 3 yards. You know what? I'm fine with that on just one play, because what that's going to do is make the backside in man line of scrimmage think about it. So make them think about it. Hesitate ever so slightly. In that split-second hesitation, when you have backs like Trevor Etienne and Nate Frazier who can hit that cutback lane with authority, all of a sudden now you might create a big play just because Carson Beck pulled it once or twice. Even though when he pulled it, you didn't get much yardage. You're like, oh my God, why are we having Carson Beck pull that? Well, it's not about Carson Beck getting yards when he pulls it. It's about what that creates in the future for our run game, potentially opening up explosive plays. So that's one thing that I would do. Now again, though, Carson Beck, that's not what he does by trade. You don't want him doing that a ton. So what else can you do? Well, jet sweep action, guys. We run a lot of jet sweep action, but we're not really handing the ball off. You can run jet sweep action all you want, but unless you hand it off, it doesn't appear to be a legitimate threat to that backside end or the in-man line of scrimmage there. It's not a legitimate threat. Now, we did do a decent job of actually handing that ball off against Clemson. Coming out in the second half, remember we had some issues in the first half running the football against Clemson, right? We did. Well, that backside man was crashing every single time. There was no room. You can say Branson Robinson wasn't doing anything. Well, I mean, Branson didn't have a great game that game, but he also had no room to work with because that backside end was just crashing, and he had nowhere to go. There was no cutback lane. Well, we came in the second half. What did we do? On that first drive, we had Arius Smith. Give him the football. Jet sweep action. Pick up, 10, 15 yards, right? Not an explosive play necessarily, but what that does, it starts to hold that backside in. Then we use, I think on the exact same drive, Dylan Bell. Very similar play. So we have to actually hand it off to Arian Smith or Dylan Bell. I think we need to do a better job of getting the ball in his hands in those situations because he's a very dynamic playmaker with the ball in his hands. Maybe it's Dominic Lovett. We need to do things to hold that backside in. I think jet motion and actually handing the ball off, not 5, 6, 7 times, but a couple of times. All you have to do, you might actually create some explosive plays doing that as well. If they're being really aggressive, you can counter that. And then once you hit a play or two, now he's got to stop and pause there, and you create cutback lanes if you still want to go with your zone run game. So I think that's something that we can do there. And finally here, toothpick and floss. I've talked about these plays a lot over the past couple of years, breaking down what they are in the Georgia offense. And this is something that really Todd Monken brought to the Georgia offense. And Brock Bowers, you saw Brock Bowers do this over and over and over again the past 2 or 3 years. In fact, against Alabama in the national championship game in 2022 when we played the 2021 season, that big touchdown catch he had in the fourth quarter, that was on floss. Okay, so what are toothpick and floss? I know you guys have been around for a long time. You know what these are, but I know we're getting some newer listeners, so I want to make sure everyone understands what I'm talking about here. So toothpick is where you have an H-back, okay? And the H-back is running like split zone action. It looks like we're running split zone. And we kind of are running split zone. But Carson Beck is reading. The quarterback is reading the backside in man on that line of scrimmage. So there's another way you can hold him. And what the tight end, the H-back, is going to do is instead of kicking out that in man on the line of scrimmage, he's going to flare out into the flat. So he's going to go across the formation at the snap, act like he's going to kick out the defensive end or whoever that in man is, like a split zone action, but instead of kicking him out, he's going to flare out into the flat. And that puts that in man on the line of scrimmage into conflict. Now he has 2 things he's got to think about. Do I take the running back or do I take this tight end, Brock Bowers, in the past? Do I take him out in the flat? If he crashes on the running back, it's a pull read for Carson Beck. He throws the tight end. You might not get a ton of yards, but you get 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 yards. You move the change, right? Floss, similar, okay? But with floss, instead of the H-back lining up and coming across the line of scrimmage at the snap, he's aligned opposite the running back. So the opposite side of the football where the running back is lying next to Carson Beck. And at the snap, he's not coming across the line of scrimmage. He's just flaring out into the flat. It's the same exact concept. The presentation is just a little bit different. But it's the same exact effect that in-man line of scrimmage is now put in conflict. Do I go out and take the tight end in coverage, or do I take the run game? If you take the tight end in coverage, well, now we create a running lane for the run game. Carson hands it off. It's a run read. If he crashes on the run, it's a pull read for Carson. You throw it to Brock Bowers, not Brock Bowers anymore. Now it's Oscar Delp or Lawson Lucky or maybe Benjamin Urasi, which is how we could use him more effectively. So that is another way that the Georgia offense can hold the backside in and just create more room for the Georgia running game. And we need to do these things, guys, because two of the most explosive playmakers we have on offense are in our backfield, and Trevor Etienne and Nate Frazier. Those are the two guys. They can make game-changing plays. They can rip off game-changing runs at any moment, but we've got to give them space to do that. You do that, number one, by spreading the defense out, and number two, by accounting for that backside in-man line of scrimmage and making that guy think. You got to put him in conflict and create a situation where he can't be right if we read it correctly. So that's something else I think we need to address offensively. Next up, play action, man. We've got to use more play action. We've got to. It's that simple, guys. Carson Beck was lethal last year off of play action. I'm not saying that we haven't used play action this year. We have. I just don't think that we've used it nearly enough. But we've got to go back to it, guys, because it freaking works. Even if the ground game is not having a ton of success and we're not just running the football down the defense's throat, it doesn't necessarily matter. Play action still works because when they see that run fake, guys, their entire careers, all these linebackers, it's drilled into their heads. You play run first. When they see run action, they're going to take steps towards line of scrimmage. And that creates space in the intermediate range for Carson Beck, where he is absolutely lethal. That's where Carson Beck is best, about 10 to 20 yards between the hashes, middle of the field. That's where he made a living last year. Now, he's fine outside the hashes, but he is exceptionally lethal between the hashes. And off-play action, when you make the linebacker step up, you create that space, you're going to have opportunities to run digs, crossers, the like. And you're going to be able to create some potentially explosive plays in the passing and the seam routes as well. Those plays will be there. We have got to get back to being comfortable using more play action, because the Alabama defense in particular, that front six, is very aggressive. Even their safeties are aggressive in run support. Like, they'll come flying downhill, a lot like the way Clemson did to a degree. They will bite. The linebackers will bite. The safeties will bite. And that will also, if we use play action like that and those guys are biting, that will help create one-on-one opportunities on the outside. So go back to what I said with Xavier Brown. Who, look, again, guys, I'm not telling you he's not good. He's a really talented player. But I'm just telling you on film, if you watch it, that guy has gotten beat multiple times. Like, quite a few times so far this season, but nobody's been able to make them pay because they haven't played a passing offense worth anything that even has a pulse right now. Wisconsin, they were playing their backup quarterback the entire game because Tyler Van Dyke tore his ACL in the first quarter. Byron Brown, good runner, cannot throw the football. Simply cannot throw the football, all right? So he hasn't really been challenged. So we want to create some one-on-one opportunities. One way to do that, play action. Because you take the safeties, you get a false step from the safeties, they bite ever so slightly. Well, that gives us a step, and that puts more pressure on a guy like Xavier Brown as a true freshman out there one-on-one. So, look, guys, we have actually thrown the football quite a bit on first down. We've actually, against Kentucky, we actually only ran the ball 40% of the time on first downs. So I'm fine with those run-pass splits on first down. I've always been an advocate of throwing the ball more on first and second down because the defense typically, that's not the primary thing they're looking for. In Georgia, with how we run the football, running play action on first and second down, that is oftentimes very good for us, very effective. So we've thrown the ball enough on first down, but my issue is the pass selection on first down. We're using it's a lot of horizontal stuff, and we're not really taking advantage of like true play action. So I want us to go back to using true play action on first and second down. I think we can have a lot of success against Alabama with how aggressive they are defensively, have a lot of success against this defense doing that. Like, I don't know. It's hard for me to account for why we aren't calling as many play action shots on first and second down. Part of me thinks you look at the Clemson defensive front, the Kentucky defensive front, two really, really, really good defensive fronts. Maybe Mike Bobo just didn't have faith in the offensive line to block those guys long enough to have Carson Beck turn his back. Maybe. But look, man, like, our offensive line, maybe it's not as good as everyone thought it was going to be, but I still think it's a really, really good offensive line. And you can't play scared, man. At some point, you just got to try to trust them. Because if we don't take shots, if we don't go back to some of these play action shots on early downs, you're not going to beat teams like Alabama. on the road. You're not going to beat teams like Texas on the road. You can't beat teams like that playing scared. You can get away with it against Kentucky, barely, but you can get away with it. You can get away with it against Tennessee Tech, but you're not going to get away with it going to a shell against teams like Alabama, teams like Texas, teams like Ole Miss, teams like Tennessee. You've got to be willing to open it up. You got to trust it. You got to trust your offensive line. Right now, we're giving less than 1 sack a game, like a little bit more than half a sack a game, all right? Now, part of that's because we're trying to protect Carson, it seems like, and we're not really giving plays time to develop back there, but we can't play scared. I think we got to call more play action shots on early downs. I think those play action shots will be there. We just got to dial them up. All right, moving along here, guys. Let's go to 3 stats that matter. I'm actually going to give you a bonus one here. We're going to put these first 2 stats together. So let's look at the rushing defense versus the passing defense for Alabama. And where is the strength? Where is the weakness for this Alabama defense? Well, if you look at it statistically through 3 games, now small sample size, it's pretty clear. The stats tell you it's their run defense. They're giving up 132 yards a game on the ground, which is 14th out of 16 teams in the SEC. They gave up 206 yards on the ground to USF, who has a very mobile quarterback in Byron Brown, who gave them a lot of issues. And then 149, almost $150 against Wisconsin a week and a half ago. All right, so right there, statistically, man, rush defense. Maybe Georgia can have some success running the football. And I think that Georgia can have some success running the football. But then you look at the passing defense. You're like, okay, well, I mean, why would we even try to throw the football? They're 3rd in the league, only giving 115 yards passing per game. Well, it's clear that they're much better defending the pass, and they're not nearly as good defending the run. Guys, I think those stats are misleading. Again, very, very small sample size. You have to factor in the context of who they've played. South Florida does not throw the ball well. They run the ball really well with the mobile quarterback and Byron Brown. He's a major part of their run game. He had 100 yards rushing against Alabama. Wisconsin had a backup quarterback. All they were trying to do for the most part was run the football until late, got out of hands. They were trying to make a comeback, so Braden Locke threw the ball a little bit, but that did not have a ton of success. Passing defense looks great. 115 yards a game, 3rd in the SEC. Great numbers, where you want to be, right? But who have you played that can hurt you in the pass game? South Florida, 96th nationally right now in passing offense. Wisconsin, 104th nationally in passing offense. And oh yeah, you played them pretty much the entire game with a backup quarterback. You were playing against a backup quarterback. So what I'm telling you is I know the passing defense numbers look really good for Bama. And you might say, oh my God, well, how Carson Beck looked against Kentucky and how anemic the Georgia passing offense looked and how good their defense seems against the pass with these numbers. Like, man, we just better try to run the football. Don't fall into that trap, guys. I'm telling you, there are plays to be had against this Alabama secondary. Xavier Brown, Damani Jackson on the other side, their safeties are good, but I think we can have some success at times. Keon Sabb coming from Michigan, good player. I think their safeties are fine, but I think we can have some success on the corners. I think we can have some success against the linebackers as well. I think Dominic Lovett can have a lot of success in the slot. So don't get scared, Mike Bobo. All right, and I know he's not going to look at the numbers, but Georgia fans, I know you might look at the numbers and say, like, why would we throw the football? Because they haven't played anyone that can challenge them. The plays have been there. The teams they have played just simply don't have the personnel to hit those plays. I think Georgia does. I know what it looked like against Kentucky. I know that, guys. But so over the past year and a half, that's an anomaly. That's the anomalous performance. That's the exception. That's not been the rule. So, yeah, the rush defense has had issues at times, but I think that you got to run the football, of course, but I also think that Georgia can have success in the pass game as well. The second stat that matters here, that was a 2-for-1 special. 3rd downs. Okay, guys, this one is a matchup that does not look like it favors Georgia on paper. Alabama has been elite, dynamic so far through 3 games on 3rd downs. They are 1st in the SEC, holding opponents to 16% on 3rd down, 16% conversion rate. Well, that doesn't bode well for Georgia. If you look at where we sit right now in offensive 3rd down conversions, only 13th in the SEC, only 39% conversion rate on 3rd downs. It's a far cry from where this Georgia offense was a year ago with basically the same personnel, largely the same personnel, and the same coordinator. We were number 1 nationally last year in 3rd down conversions, 55%. That's crazy, guys. 55%. Right now, through 3 games, 39%. That's got to change. Bama has been really good on 3rd downs. Georgia has not been good on 3rd downs. Now, again, one of the reasons Bama has been good on 3rd downs is because they have not played anyone that has any ability to threaten them with a pass game whatsoever. I think things will be a little bit different against Georgia. But still, that on paper does not bode well for Georgia. Georgia's got to figure out a way to be more efficient on 3rd downs. I'll come back to this a little bit later, but the way you change that is you are more efficient on first and second down. So you're not in third and long consistently. That's going to be one of the keys for Georgia, again, as I will get to here momentarily. And finally, the third stat that matters, Alabama is second in the SEC in yards per play, giving up only 3.37 yards per play. I love these efficiency numbers, 3.37 yards per play. This has been very, very efficient on defense, just not giving up much at all. Again, offensively, who they play that's really able to challenge them, not much, but still, they've done what they had to do against a competition that has been in front of them. So when you look at those numbers, 3.37 yards per play, that's elite, guys. That's excellent. What that means is just really tough to expect to go into Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama by grinding out long drives on a consistent enough basis to where you can win the football game. I don't think that's the recipe for winning this game against Alabama for Georgia. I don't think going there with the mindset, okay, we're going to grind out 3 or 4, like 12 to 14 play drives and just control the clock and be able to get out of there with a W. That's probably not going to happen. They're too efficient on a down-to-down basis, which is why I think it will be very, very important for this Georgia offense to find a way to hit explosive plays against this Alabama defense. And again, I will also come back to that here at the end of this episode. All right, speaking of explosive plays, let's go ahead and get to it, guys. 2 keys for the Georgia offense. So I want to go back to those last 2 stats that I threw at you, right? So Georgia not being good on third downs, Alabama defensively being elite on third downs, Alabama being awesome on a down-by-down basis defensively, only giving up 3.37 yards per play. So what are my 2 keys for this Georgia offense against this Alabama defense? Well, number one, as I talked about there a second ago, Georgia has got to be more efficient on first and second downs. It's that simple, guys. We are not going to win this football game if Alabama is able to consistently get us in third and long. And to be quite honest with you guys, we have been in third and long way too much this season. 20 times for the first 3 games, we have been in third and 7 or longer. Against Kentucky, we were in third and 7 or longer 6 of the 13 third down attempts in that game. You're not going to convert third downs at a high rate when nearly half of your third downs are third and long, third and 7 or more. That's not a recipe for having a high degree of success on third downs. Why was Georgia so good on third downs last year? Because we weren't in third and long very often. We were able to run the football effectively. We used Brock Bowers effectively. We used to screen him effectively. We were in third and short far more than we were in third and long, so our conversion rate was far higher than it has been through 3 games. So we've got to get back to being more effective, more efficient on first and second down. A big part of that goes back to what I was talking about earlier. See how it's kind of all come together here? We've got to spread things out. We've got to stop running into all of these stacked boxes where we're outnumbered. And if we're going to continue to run the football in those boxes where we're outnumbered, we've got to do something to take the numbers back. And that something is accounting for that backside and basically optioning off of them, taking them out of the play without having to dedicate a blocker to them. Those are things that we have to do. But we've got to be more efficient on first and second down. We will not beat Alabama if that trend continues. If we are consistently in third and long against Alabama, they're too good defensively, they have too many pass rushers for us to find a way to win this football game. It'd be a miracle if we win this football game. If we have 6 of our 13 third downs against Alabama be third and 7 or longer, we're not going to win the football game. I feel very confident saying that. So again, how do you do that? You create more space. I think you go back to more gap scheme stuff, have more success on early downs in the run game, use more legit play action, as I talked about earlier, to loosen the defense up. All those things will help Georgia have more success on first, second down. So we're not just every down running into stacked boxes over and over again, just bashing our head against the wall without any success. The definition of insanity. So I think that is one major key for Georgia. First and second down efficiency. Stay out of third and long. And then finally, I talked about this a couple times, so let's just wrap it up here. We've got to create explosive plays. We simply did not create enough of those against Kentucky. We didn't create enough of them against Clemson until the second half. And what happened when Georgia started creating explosive plays against Clemson in the second half? Oh yeah, we ran away with the game. When we weren't creating explosive plays in the first half, it was way too tight. 6-0, 2 field goals, all we could muster. We've got to create explosive plays against defenses that have as much talent as Alabama has. And that's going to be a challenge, guys. Kane Womack does a really good job as Alabama defense. They have a lot of really good players. It's Alabama. They recruit as well as anyone in the country. And here's the other thing with Alabama. So far, through 3 games, now I know that the offenses they faced have not been elite. There's that context, but still, They've done an incredible job against the teams that have been put in front of them. They've only given up 3 plays of 20 or more yards all season long. Who cares they haven't been challenged? That's still impressive. So if you think about it, with their down by down efficiency thus far, as I laid out, only 3.37 yards per play right now, again, it's going to be very tough to grind out these long drives on a consistent enough basis to win this game. And also, like, when you try to grind out long drives, it puts way more pressure and importance on those drives. If you don't score on those long drives, like score touchdowns, well, now you've limited possessions and you might not have as many opportunities to actually score. So you have to find ways, guys, to generate explosive plays against an Alabama defense that, quite frankly, has just not given up explosive plays so far this season. 3 plays of 20 or more yards. Now, the only team that's done a better job of that in the SEC, well, that does happen to be the Georgia Bulldogs. I think as a whole, in this game, I think one of the keys to the entire game is which offense can create more explosive plays. Both defenses have been awesome at limiting explosive plays, so which offense can create the explosive plays? Which defense will blink first? So Georgia's got to try to make that beat Alabama, and we've got to do it from the jump. One way that we can do that is for Carson Beck to go back to being who Carson Beck was the back half of last year, where he was letting the ball rip, all right? Play like you actually have played football before, and you've played against teams like this, Carson. I know that you have. I know you can do it. I've seen you do it. You can't play scared. Carson Beck cannot play scared in this game. He has to stop playing so risk-averse. I do think there's some issues right now. There's no Brock Bowers. There's no Ladd McConkey. Those are guys that he just felt so secure with, putting balls into tight windows. He trusted those guys to make plays in those one-on-one situations. I don't know, at least it seems like, he doesn't have that same kind of faith in some of these newer guys that are in this system. He's got to get over that. You've got to trust these guys to do their job and make plays. You do your job, which is to give them opportunities in one-on-one coverage. Let the ball rip. You got to trust it out there. Take shots because, again, as I said earlier, especially against Xavier Brown, if we can scheme it up, and Damani Jackson to a lesser degree on the other side there, I think the opportunities to hit explosive plays against these corners will be there. We've just got to be willing to take those shots, to trust your playmakers, trust what you see, and let it rip. I think that's another key to this game. And finally, my one prediction for this Georgia offense against the Alabama defense in this matchup. So we know, guys, we spent the past week and a half talking about how poor Carson Beck played against Kentucky. That's very well documented. Everyone's had an opinion on it. Even yours truly has had an opinion on that. Again, did a video earlier this week. Check that out if you haven't already. But my prediction in this game for the Georgia offense against the Alabama defense is this. Carson Beck will throw for more than 300 yards against Alabama on Saturday. Now, I know Alabama fans who have found this video, you're going to just scoff at that. You're going to light me up. All right, do your best, man. Go to the comments, light me up, do your best. Tell me how dumb I am. It's all good, whatever. Big boy, I can handle it, all right? The noise has been loud, though. We know the noise has been loud. The questions have been plentiful about Carson Beck over the past week and a half after that performance against Kentucky. And Carson Beck has had to listen to that for the better part of 2 weeks. Mike Bobo has had to listen to it for the better part of 2 weeks about how he can't call a game. Anytime the Georgia offense doesn't perform at an elite level, the Boo Birds come out calling for Mike Bobo, right? There's always that segment of the Georgia fan base. They're just waiting to pounce. Just like there's people always waiting to pounce on Stetson Bennett. There's that segment that's always waiting to pounce on Mike Bobo. No matter what he's done, no matter the fact that he produced a top 5 offense in every major statistical category last year, at the slightest sign of weakness, we're ready to pounce. So Bobo's heard it. Carson Beck has heard it for almost 2 weeks now. They sat there. They stewed on it for 2 weeks. So I do believe in this game. Call me crazy if you want. Maybe I am. I do believe that Georgia will come out on a mission to get the pass game going against Alabama, to get Carson Beck going. And as I've said several times today, I still believe Alabama's secondary has not truly been challenged so far this year. There were plays to be made against that secondary, really in every game so far this year. Whether it was Western Kentucky, certainly South Florida. I think the most obvious game was South Florida. Wisconsin at times as well. But those 3 teams just simply did not have the personnel to actually make those plays when they present themselves. And if I can see that watching the tape, you know our offensive staff who does this for a living, professionals who know far more than I do, they see the same things. And I have to believe that after that Kentucky performance and what they've seen on tape, with the shots that are there against Alabama secondary, you have to believe they're going to come on a mission to take those shots. And I do believe, while Wisconsin, South Florida, and Western Kentucky did not have the personnel offensively to take advantage of those opportunities, I do believe Georgia does. The Kentucky game notwithstanding, I know that was not a good look, but I still believe in this Georgia offense. I still believe in Carson Beck. That was a terrible look, guys, but I will maintain, as of right now, subject to change, if we see this trend continue down the road, that Kentucky performance was the anomaly. Based on the sample size that we have of Carson Beck over the last, 17 starts, that's the one time that he has really, really looked like that. They had some games early last year, like he was still trying to get into a rhythm, but it was never like that. That's still the exception. I don't think that's the rule. So I believe that we have the guys that can make them pay. I think that the Carson Beck that we know and love from last year, at times this year, maybe the second half against Clemson, I know that guy can make those plays. I've seen him make those plays. And I do believe that we will see that Carson Beck again on Saturday. I think that we will see the best version of Carson Beck. Call it wishful thinking if you want. Maybe it is. But I think on the big stage, after that terrible, let's just be real, terrible performance against Kentucky, where I do think he was probably the biggest issue that we had offensively, I think he will come out swinging. I think the entire Georgia offense will come out swinging. I think Carson Beck puts up a huge performance on the big stage, and all the naysayers, it might not quiet them forever, but for the time being, I think it will quiet them at least for a couple of weeks. But all right, guys, thank you so much for being here. I hope you guys enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed running through it today. This was just part one. I will be back tomorrow with part two. We'll flip it over to the other side. We'll look at the matchup between the Georgia defense and the Alabama offense. So again, if you enjoy this episode, if you like this brand of in-depth Georgia football coverage, hardcore stuff designed for the most die-hard Georgia fans out there, make sure to subscribe to this channel right now. Like the video, comment, let me know what you guys think, and check out the Glory UGA podcast for a lot more coverage of Georgia football. But thank you again for being here, guys. I'm Tyler, and as always, go Dogs!
Man, is there going to be some property destroyed tonight. 26-21. Dogs on top.